Hello everyone, it's Chris with What Dog Studios, and today we're going to go over some photography tips on airshow photography and what settings I use on my Nikon D850. Stay tuned. Okay, tip number one. I always recommend shooting raw. It gives you more latitude in post-processing, so you can pull shadows, increase your contrast, adjust those colors. Here's an example below. You can see the Nikon NEF file or Canon, their RAW file. Just go through your camera manual to find out how you set RAW if that's what you want to shoot, but I do recommend it. Tip number two, I recommend shooting in manual or shutter preferred automatics. That'd be the S setting on Nikon or your TV mode on Canon. I found these are typically the best modes to use when shooting aviation photography. Your mileage may vary, but that's what I recommend shooting with. I also suggest setting your camera to continuous autofocus and continuous shooting, typically 5 frames a second or faster. Depends on your camera's capabilities, but look in your owner's manual to find out what it's capable of. When it comes to light metering, I always set my camera to a matrix metering on a Nikon or evaluative on Canon. These tend to be the best modes I have found to shoot the aerial shots against sky and so forth. And I would also suggest maybe even using your exposure compensation to make some minor adjustments. Again, look in your owner's manual for the details on that. Tip number three, it's always a good idea to know where the sun's going to be when you're going to shoot an air show. In the example I've got here, you can see 2 aircraft flying in the quote-unquote green zone, and the sun up in the middle as an example being directly in front of you. I always recommend not shooting towards the sun and into the sun itself. So kind of use this as a general rule. You don't have to. You can certainly shoot towards the sun, but you're going to get better shots with better lighting conditions if you shoot where the green zone is in this example. Tip number 4. Where's the best place to shoot the air show from? Well, typically I found that the front row of the show line and or possibly a photo pit are the best locations. Although if you have special access to the event, you may get a different spot to shoot from that's clear of obstacles or people. In the next slide here, you're going to see an example of a small air show we shot locally. And the example is kind of showing you'll kind of want to get a front row seat to keep from having obstacles in front of you, people, and so forth. So that's just kind of the general rule. Front row is the best place to shoot a air show from if you can. Tip number 5. Practice panning with your camera. This is a very, very important thing to do. The aircraft are moving quite quickly, and when you're going left to right, right to left, even up and down, it's always good to be able to follow that aircraft as smoothly as possible. It's going to give you your cleanest shots, your best shots, especially at slower shutter speeds. So, again, practice panning. Practice makes perfect. Okay, tip number 6. Recommended shutter speeds for shooting aircraft. I always recommend starting off on propeller aircraft of 1/320th of a second and kind of work your way on down from that point. It's a good starting point for a lot of people, and if you can work your way down into the 1/200th of a second range or even lower, you'll start getting more prop blow, and that's kind of what gives you that sense of motion when you're looking at propeller planes fly. For jet aircraft, I always try to stay 1/2000th of a second, maybe a little bit slower if the lighting's poor, or even a little faster if I can. The next slide, we're going to see an example of a aircraft that I shot, a P-51 Mustang, that was shot at 1/320th of a second. It's got pretty good prop blur. The next slide is going to be the Catalina at 1/200th of a second. So again, there's pretty good prop blur. Sense of motions being applied. This one is at 1/60th of a second, this P-51 Mustang, and it's what we call a full disc. And when the plane came around at 1/60th of a second, you're able to get pretty much a full disc shot on it, meaning the prop's making one full rotation when that shutter is open. These are very, very difficult to get, so don't start here. You're going to get very frustrated. If you're getting 10-20% keepers by doing these kinds of shots, you're doing well. And the last shot here of a propeller aircraft was shot at 1/50th of a second in panning on takeoff. So again, a lot of practice, lots of technique is used to get these panning shots like this. And the last example here is going to be a jet aircraft shot at 1/2000th of a second to kind of get that stop action. Tip number 7, choosing your equipment. Well, I'm of the belief you certainly don't have to start out with a Pro Series camera and spend, $5,000 on gear. So I know lots of guys out there that are shooting mid-range and even entry-level DSLR, Canon, Nikon cameras and so forth and get excellent shots. So don't think you have to go out there and buy a super expensive camera. I do not recommend the mirrorless cameras. I've used a lot of different cameras in my experience is that the Fujis, Panasonics, Olympus, and Sonys can do an okay job. If you can afford the top-end Sonys, you're going to get the best results, probably just as good as the top-end Nikon and Canon cameras, but they're extremely expensive. So if you're going to shoot aviation or wildlife photography, I recommend probably staying with a DSLR is probably your best bet. In 2 or 3 years from now, you're probably going to start seeing a much more improved version of a mirrorless that'll probably be able to keep up with the aviation type shots. So choosing a telephoto lens, if you're going to buy a kit, a lot of times those kits come with a 70-300 telephoto on an APS-C camera. And the APS-C is a crop sensor camera, also known as a crop sensor camera. So that 70-300 is equivalent to a 450 millimeter in most cases or thereabouts, equivalent to a full frame. So you're getting quite a bit of reach for your money. They're not bad lenses to start with. If you can afford a Sigma or Tamron 150-600 millimeter, those are great choices. They have great reach. They're bigger and heavier, so be aware of that. And if you're a Canon shooter, a fantastic lens is the 100-400 version 2. It's a little bit lighter than the big 600 millimeters. It's very expensive, but it's well worth it. It's an excellent lens. Tip number 8, post-processing. Post-processing can always help enhance your photography. Taking your photos from this to this. And as you can see, there's a dramatic difference between the two. There are many programs you can use out there today, including Lightroom and Luminar. I'd say they're probably some of the better programs to start with and use. Luminar probably being the easiest one to get into and probably the least expensive. But also keep in mind, look for a program that's able to read your RAW files of your camera. Some applications cannot read RAW files or all RAW files of every camera, so keep that in mind. Please note, too, I'm not sponsored by Luminar or Lightroom, but I have used both and had fantastic results with either of them. So I currently shoot a Nikon D850 with a Sigma 150-600 millimeter contemporary lens. That's the smaller of the 600 millimeter Sigma lenses. I found it to be an outstanding lens, a fantastic value for the money, and I have shot just about every brand out there over the years, and I found this to be the best combo for me personally for aviation and wildlife. So I typically set the camera to manual mode, auto ISO, and always record images in RAW format as I discussed before. And typically I'll shoot at 1/320th of a second down to maybe 1/200th of a second for most of my stuff. Occasionally I'll go down to 1/60th, try to get a full disc on a propeller aircraft if I can, or the effect that I'm going for. It just all depends. For jet aircraft, I typically shoot at 1/2000th of a second, but we'll go as low as 1/60th of a second, believe it or not, for airplanes, jet aircraft, just to get that effect, that motion effect if you can. A couple of my fellow aviation photographers can actually do this and do it quite well. I'm quite amazed, but again, don't get caught up with that super slow shutter speed. For jets especially, keep your shutter speed up, and obviously the lower you go on a bright sunny day, the smaller the aperture has to get, meaning that's a larger number, f22, f32, and so on. So you start getting some diffraction with that. You have other issues that come into play when you have to close down your aperture so far. So anyway, I hope this helped a lot. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope that the tips were helpful. And if you liked, please like. And please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And I'll have some more videos out soon. Take care, everybody.